Thank you for taking the time to download this podcast show from Talk, Mind and Heart. My name is Kevin O'Doherty. I'm a psychologist, author and cognitive behaviour therapist. All of our shows will focus on personal, mental and spiritual development. Many of the shows that I deliver will be on psychological health and well-being from a CBT perspective. And my partner Teresa Khan, who's an NLP life coach, Reiki master, teacher and author, will be interviewing a variety of teachers, therapists and inspirational speakers over the coming weeks and months. We really want these shows to be as inspiring, informative and relevant as possible to our listeners and subscribers. So please do share with us your thoughts, feelings and questions. We do love to hear from you. Our training and consultancy website is www.calibergold.com and you can get in touch with us from there. There are also links on calibergold.com to the private practice websites of both myself, Kevin O'Doherty, and Teresa Khan. Finally, to ensure that you don't miss out on any of our shows, please do subscribe. We're really keen to share this service with a worldwide community. In today's session then, I'll be talking about anxiety from a CBT perspective, and more specifically, helping you to take those first steps in understanding your anxiety and getting to know about your anxiety. Because the more that we know about a condition such as anxiety, the easier it becomes to tackle and the less frightening it therefore feels. The first point to make about anxiety is that although it doesn't feel nice when we're feeling anxious, anxiety is actually absolutely normal. It's one of the normal human emotions, and we all experience anxiety, all of us, myself included, from time to time. Anxiety serves a very useful purpose for us. So, for example, when we're crossing a busy road, it makes good sense from a survival perspective for us to feel some sense of anxiety so that we're kind of on edge, we're very alert, and we're paying close attention to the possible dangers that there are in crossing that road. One of the problems with anxiety sometimes is that we might feel anxiety where there is actually no apparent dangers around. And we'll be talking about that in future sessions, and specifically the cognitive aspects of anxiety. So remember, anxiety is absolutely normal and we all experience it from time to time. So please don't give yourself a hard time for being anxious some of the time. Don't beat yourself up, don't put yourself down, and don't be judgmental with yourself either. Okay, so give yourself a bit of a break. Anxiety is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of humanity. It's a sign that you're a human being and you have a full range of emotions like the rest of us. Okay. When attending a CBT session for the first time, the first and possibly the second session, there will be the opportunity usually for both yourself and the therapist to begin to understand the anxiety that you've been experiencing. And for this reason, the therapist will often ask a whole range of questions in that first and possibly second session so as to help him or her to get a good understanding of the anxiety that you've been experiencing. Okay. And this understanding of anxiety is often very therapeutic for the client also. So it gives us the opportunity to offload our anxieties in that first or second session, to tell our story, as it were, to speak about the anxiety that we've been experiencing. Okay. And the more we talk about an issue such as anxiety, the less frightening or stressful it therefore becomes. It's very important in those first few sessions for the CBT therapist to get a very clear understanding of the anxiety that you've been experiencing, when it began, when it happens, what kind of things you do to help, what kind of triggers there might be. Those kinds of questions that we're going to cover in greater depth in just a short while. So it's very useful for the CBT therapist to take that kind of case history, as it were. Okay. This session today is going to focus on some of those questions that will usually be discussed in that first or second session of CBT. And this is for you to get to know your anxiety much better before taking steps with the future sessions in tackling the anxiety. After each question is explained in today's podcast show, I'd recommend that you pause this podcast and just jot down some notes. First of all, write that question, okay, and perhaps go through the whole show and write down all of the questions. I think there are around about 13 or 14 questions that we'll be looking at in terms of anxiety. So pause the podcast after each question and write that question down for now. And then afterwards, I'd recommend that you listen to this podcast a number of times and try to begin to answer some of those questions about your anxiety. Have a good think about your anxiety and the question that you've written down in relation to that. Okay. And in subsequent sessions, we'll use this knowledge that you will have gained from thinking about these questions. We'll use that knowledge to help you begin to challenge that anxiety and use a number of strategies and techniques to reduce the anxiety. Excuse me. Okay, question number 1 then. Describe how your anxiety feels. So describe those symptoms. When you feel that anxiety, describe in depth, if you can, exactly how it affects you. So some of those symptoms. So for example, some people often feel butterflies in the stomach. They might feel that their palms are sweaty. They might feel sick. They might feel a little bit dizzy. They might feel weak at the knees. They might feel short of breath. So a range of symptoms that we sometimes feel when we're anxious. This first question really is for you to begin to write down how anxiety affects you. How does it feel? Write that in as much depth as you can. That will be really useful. Question number 2. When did your anxiety begin? When was your first memory of feeling anxious? Okay, maybe it was a few weeks ago, a few months ago, maybe it was many years ago. Try and describe that period. When did it begin? Give it a month and a year if you can. Okay. Question number 3. How has your experience of anxiety changed over time? Okay. Have a think about this one. How has your anxiety changed over that time? So, has it gradually gotten worse over that time since it began? Has it gradually gotten better? Does it fluctuate day by day, week by week? Does it go up and down? Has it gotten a lot worse, does it feel, since it began? So spend some time on this question and just describe how the anxiety has changed over those weeks, months, or years that you've been experiencing it. Okay. Question number 4. When your anxiety began, let's imagine it began 7 years ago, well, that's your first recollection of starting to feel heightened anxiety. What else was happening in your life back then? So, for example, had you recently moved home? Had you recently changed jobs? Had you recently finished a relationship? Had you recently started a relationship? Had you recently been promoted at work? So anything else that was going on at that time when you remember your anxiety heightening or getting more severe? Okay, so what was going on in your life at that time? Question number 5. When is it that you feel anxious? Have a think about this one. Do you tend to feel anxious just in the mornings when you first get out of bed? Getting ready for work, perhaps? Do you only feel anxious in the evenings? Do you tend to feel anxious in the middle of the night? So do you wake at 3 in the morning feeling anxious? So when do you feel anxious? Have a think about any patterns that there might be. Number 6, who do you tend to be with when you feel anxious or when you feel heightened anxiety? Is it when you tend to be by yourself? Is it when you're with a whole group of people? Do you feel heightened anxiety when you're with one person in particular? Have a think about that one and write down what answers you can. Number 7, your coping strategies. What kind of coping strategies have you learned to use to help manage your anxiety? So what do you do when you feel anxious? What do you do that seems to help the anxiety? So some people go for a walk, for example. Some people listen to some music. Some people go to the gym and exercise. Some people close the windows and close the blinds and turn off the telephone when they feel anxious. But what do you do that feels as though it helps the anxiety? Make a list of those things. What kind of things tend to worsen the anxiety? So is there anything that happens or anything that you do that you've noticed makes you feel more anxious? Okay. Question number 9. What help, support, advice, information have you accessed in the past or sought in the past for the anxiety? Okay. Make a list if you can. If you haven't sought any help, why is that? Have a think about that also. Question number 10. How does anxiety affect you in your social life, your work life, your home life, and your relationships? How does it affect you in those 4 areas? Okay. Question 11. On a scale of 1 to 10, perhaps. Now, it's difficult to measure anxiety because it's a non-physical thing, isn't it? Although we feel the physical symptoms, anxiety in itself is a psychological thing. So it's difficult to measure it, but do your best to measure the anxiety that you experience on a scale of 1 to 10. Excuse me. So number 1 would be no anxiety at all, or very, very low anxiety. And number 10 would be terrible anxiety, very high levels of anxiety. Okay. So how severe does it feel when you feel that anxiety? Question 12, again on a scale of 1 to 10, how determined are you to implement changes that will perhaps help you to manage your anxiety better? Yeah. So how prepared or how determined are you to implement changes? Again, 1 would be not really bothered much, and number 10, absolutely determined to make some lifestyle changes to help tackle the anxiety. Okay. Number 13, visualize some point in the future where your anxiety levels were very low and the anxiety that you experienced was very infrequent. Just take some time to describe how that would feel. What kind of things would you do at that point that you don't currently do? What kind of doors might that open for you? What kind of opportunities might arise for you? How might you feel better in the future when you have low levels of anxiety and very infrequent levels of anxiety? And the final question for now to have a think about is, when you experience the anxiety, What kind of thoughts go through your mind at that time? Either